All right, greetings and welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. My name is Kerry Miller, here with my good friend Graham Doran. We are recording a little earlier than usually around like 7 p.m. on the East Coast, but got to watch our Chiefs at 3. Hopefully they beat the Ravens. My dumb ass is doing dry January still, but want to give you the freedom to have a few drinks during that game. But because we're recording earlier than usual, going to try and avoid talking about anybody playing today, although we did already see UConn just eviscerate Xavier. My God. But jump right in. We don't really need to discuss the one seeds. They're pretty cut and dry right now, right? You can maybe debate the order a little bit, but Purdue, Houston, UConn, and North Carolina. No debate. Let's go to the 4 seeds, which is what you wanted to talk about. You said 12 through 16. Let you soapbox a little bit here why you want to focus on those teams.
I really don't think there's enough teams worthy of being on the late part of the 3 line, so the lower seeded 3 teams and the 4 seeds. I just don't think they're 3 or 4 seed quality. So once I get past Creighton, who I have at 11th overall, I actually feel pretty good about Kansas. I have 9th overall, and actually I think they have a better resume than Marquette, who I have 8th. It's just that they played head to head on a neutral court and they were right next to each other. So I scrubbed Kansas to 9th and Marquette to 8th.
I have the exact same 8 and 9, so
And then
agreed.
I have right behind that, I go with a team that I think is very worthy of being on the 3 line. Um, and that is, who am I missing here? It is somebody that I think is very
They
worthy
are
of being on the
worthy.
3 line. Iowa State, the team that just beat
Oh, you have
Kansas
them up at
yesterday.
10. Okay.
I believe that the Cyclones have a great combination of efficiency and elite wins. They've beaten both Houston and Kansas at home, but they also went on the road to beat TCU.
Yep.
So I feel like they've got a really good combination going for them. So I feel very, very, very good about Iowa State there. Creighton, uh, not in love with the profile, but they've got some really good wins, great efficiency. Makes sense. It's when I get to 12th overall that I'm just sitting there begging for anybody to be good enough to be a 3 seed, and I don't see it. I've got Kentucky there by default because I had a bunch of teams that I don't think are 3 seed good, and Kentucky just kind of happened to be there. So Kentucky had that neutral court win over UNC. I think that's good enough to move them up to that final 3 seed for now. Behind them, I have a combination of Alabama, Dayton, Duke, and Texas Tech. Texas Tech barely sneaking onto that 4 line after a huge win yesterday in Norman. But I don't think those are 4 seed good teams
No.
either. Like, I just don't think any of those teams should really be on the 4 line. Maybe Alabama. I will say Alabama, I think, is worthy of a 4 seed, but they're a 6 loss team too. Like, this is not some sterling record from Alabama, and beating Auburn at home. Everybody beats Auburn at home. Like, actually, everybody beats
We'll,
Auburn at
we'll
home.
get to Auburn in a minute, man. But Alabama's a good segue because that's who I have at 12 overall. They're my bottom 3, and I hate it. Like you texted me, like let's do 12 through 16 seeds. I looked at my 12. I was like, oh yeah, this is not good. I still have Dayton as a 3, so I think I have them 11 overall. We'll touch on Dayton in a little bit. Had that loss to Richmond yesterday, but their resume is still really strong. 3-3 against Quad One. No bad losses. I think they're still 8th in the resume metrics. So I'm still, again, because as we're saying, the 4 seeds are just not inspiring right now. I still think Dayton is above that group. But you mentioned Iowa State. They are my top 4 seed now, 13 overall. They were my third team out 3 weeks ago. They were 77th in the resume metrics. Now they're 20th because they picked up those 3 Quad 1A wins. I mean, this is the maddening part of the Big 12's scheduling, right? In November and December. It's fun to watch them now. They didn't play anybody. Literally half of the league currently has a non-conference strength of schedule rank of 290 or worse. The only teams above 160 are Kansas and Baylor, I think at 44 and 87 respectively. And it feels like they're gaming the system because Iowa State and Texas Tech are now, solidly, very solidly in the field. TCU pretty solidly in the field as well. BYU, I think, was one of those teams around 290 in non-conference. They're very comfortably in as well because they just beat the crap out of Quad 4. Didn't really have quality wins. It just seemed like the entire league took the approach of if we can, hold our own in league play, why even bother trying to get quality non-conference wins? Working out great for a couple of them, not so much for Cincinnati, Kansas State, and Texas. So it will eventually result in some Big 12 teams probably missing the field for those non-conference reasons. But anyway, Iowa State 13, I wrote down my notes and left them at home. I don't remember who my 4 seeds are right now, but I remember I have Iowa State at 13. Texas Tech I have up as 18 or 19. BYU is in that range. Baylor, Oklahoma. I think I just have a swath of Big 12 teams from 16 to 19. Creighton is in there as well. But yeah, it's a mess. Like nobody really stands out. I think there is a pretty clear cut after 11 there. So now let's get to teams that Kerry has cursed. My jinxing powers are phenomenal. This is our 8th pod, and pretty much every pod, there's one team that we talk about. We argue. I have them a little bit higher than you, and then they suffer a terrible loss. So you look awesome. Fade Kerry. That's the moral of the story for the rest of this show. But I want to talk on 6 teams in particular. I have them on a text here. I don't have my list written down, but Arizona, Clemson, Dayton, Memphis, Princeton, and Utah. I'm going to go through them in the order that I have them seeded now. Arizona, I still have them as a 2. You do as well, right?
Solid 2 seed.
Yeah, they're my 7 overall, but when they lost that game Thursday night, holy cow. People were like, this is not a top 4 seed. They don't, I don't even know if they'll make the tournament. Like, okay, those wins in November and December still count. Why don't you talk about Arizona's resume? Because I talked them up too much last time.
Yeah, they actually yesterday they had 7 quad 1 wins, so they were looking even better yesterday. They actually lost a quad 1 win, not a huge deal. They still have 6 quad 1 wins. I have them 7th overall, right behind Wisconsin. I think they're very solid 2 seed. I think there's even a gap between the Marquette Kansas grouping and I would say Wisconsin and Arizona I have together on 6-7, and then a step up to Tennessee from there. But yeah, when you have the quality wins that Arizona has, and they are very quality wins, they don't disappear from the resume.
Yeah.
And they've also got nice efficiency to go with it. I think they're a slam dunk 2 seed for the time being.
I noticed after that loss to Oregon State, very like eerily similar to Connecticut from last year. Connecticut started out, November into December, looked like the clear-cut favorite to win it all, and then just tanked in January. I think they lost like 6 out of 8. The turning point was a loss at home to Xavier on January 25th. Coincidentally, that's when Arizona lost to Oregon State. I'm not throwing in the towel on the Wildcats yet. I think they still might be a legit title contender, but
I would say that Arizona, I personally believe your national champion is going to come from one of the top 4 seeds right now. I think either, and I do have a very clear order that I think they should be in. I think it should be UConn, UNC, Purdue, and Houston in that order. But I think the national champion will be one of those 4 teams.
For seeding or for championship odds?
For championship.
I was going to say, you've been saying you've Purdue solidly at 1 overall.
But I think your national champion will be in that order. I think UConn has had some health issues, so if they are healthy, which I believe they will be, they're my pick. If not, I think UNC is a machine. And because they're doing it in the ACC, they're maybe not getting quite as much attention, but I think they are really, really good. Houston I have a little bit of concerns about their offense scoring. So great rebounding team, phenomenal defensive team, honestly one of the best defensive teams you could possibly have. But I'm a little worried about their scoring. Don't have that concern about Purdue, but I just don't see the same dynamism from Purdue that I see from UConn and UNC. And I think at some point that's going to catch up to Purdue. But I think one of those 4 teams will win the national championship. If they don't, Arizona is my call from any other team above Tennessee, who has excellent efficiency and excellent resume metrics. I think Arizona's that team.
I think of those 4, North Carolina is the one I could see falling off pretty quickly just because they really haven't beaten anybody good in a long time. I mean, their best win at home against Tennessee, really good. They won at Clemson, which is losing value like crazy. The home win over Oklahoma, well, not home, in Charlotte, home win. Still looks good, but like if they were to lose to a Wake Forest or like one of those bubble teams, could cause some questions. I mean, they've been trending up so much because their defense is unreal. They've won like 10 games in a row. So yeah, I would agree. I mean, we talked about like a week ago. They were one of the 4 teams that I felt comfortable. If I had to pick a group of teams, I would have them. But I think they could fall off. I don't necessarily think they will. My next jinxing power team, Dayton, who I have at 11 overall still. I think you have either a 4 or a high 5. How did you land there with the Flyers?
I wanted them to be a 4 seed last week, but I had to move them to a 3 because the same issue was happening. I just didn't have enough teams that I thought were 3 seed worthy. Dayton had such great resume metrics, the only 2 losses. Losing at Richmond's not a bad loss,
No,
and
that's
we'll
actually
actually get to
quad one.
them later in this conversation.
Okay.
But I believe it was a fine loss. One I don't really want to punish them for. I just consider this correcting Dayton to where I think they should have been the whole time, which is 14th overall.
Yeah, that was a very unusual game. Deron Holmes was terrible in the first half, then got into foul trouble in the second half. Like, if he scores 9 points, you're not going to win on the road against a second tier team in the A10. It happens. We assumed it was eventually going to happen. Now that it has, I think that removes their cushion for sure. I don't think it immediately punishes them. So I had them as my 9 overall, dropped them to 11 now. But if they were to lose again to a St. Bonaventure or a VCU, then maybe they slip a couple seed lines, like a 5 or a 6, because then that would really start to hurt their resume. Next one on the list, I believe, is Clemson. I think I have it 27 overall. Where are you at the Tigers now?
I have them at exactly 25 overall. So they're my top 7 seed. I think they're 6 seed worthy, but I just had too many teams that I thought were 6 seeds.
You can go ahead and talk about that controversial finish if you want. You know I'm a Duke guy. I'm not going to talk about it. But.
So here's my problem with that call. And it has nothing to do with Duke. It really has nothing to do with Duke. It's just that if you're an offensive player and you want to flail your body like that into a vertical defender who's doing this, you could draw that literally every play.
That's the James Harden
If they're going to let that happen, why even watch basketball? That should be the go-to play every single time if they're going to reward that with a foul. I would say this. Do you think they would have called it if it was, and this isn't about Duke, this is just about any home team. If it was any home team playing defense in that scenario and the visiting team was the one who did that, they don't call that.
Nope.
They call it for the home team. They do not call that for the visiting team. That's why I have a problem with that call. That was, just something the home team tends to get.
Yeah. It was very much controversial. It's Clemson's own damn fault that they committed turnovers on 4 straight possessions before that to let that happen. But, yeah, that's a pretty well summarizes where Clemson's at right now. I think they've lost 5 out of 7. They just keep not doing enough to win repeatedly. And if they're similar to Dayton, now they've lost their cushion of that great resume they built up early in the season. If they were to lose to one of those bubble teams in the ACC, I mean, I have them as a 7 now. They could slip to a 10 in a hurry.
I mean, this is a completely profile-changing result for Clemson. Had they held on to that win, I probably have them as a 5 seed right now.
At least, yeah.
And Duke, I probably have them as a 5 or a 6 seed. So now Duke's almost at a 3 seed for me. But, close only counts in handshoes and horse grenades. Handshoes and horse grenades.
Horse grenades, yes.
Horseshoes.
Hashtag horse grenades.
We gotta remember that one for the future.
Yeah.
But
so now that you brought up Duke, I remember those were my 4 seeds. Duke and Kentucky. How the hell do I forget them? But yeah. Memphis, I have at 29 overall now. It was barely 2 weeks ago we were talking about them as a 2 seed. Where are you at with those Tigers?
I think Auburn has fallen faster in not necessarily the amount of seed lines they've fallen, but they've fallen faster in my view of them than any other team.
We're talking Memphis, not Auburn. We went from the Clemson Tigers to the Memphis Tigers. We'll get to the Auburn Tigers.
I heard Tigers.
And the Princeton Tigers momentarily.
I'm not going to lie. I didn't hear the very first thing you said, and I was like, Tigers, 8 seed, 8
you
overall.
You had horse grenades on the brain.
That's exactly literally, I was still thinking about, I can't believe I said horse grenades. So the Memphis Tigers, I have now at an 8 seed. Exactly. I have them at my 32nd overall team. And it's really just because they've gotten to the point where I think their efficiency metrics and their resume metrics are kind of meeting smack dab in the middle.
Yep. Yeah, they're a classic bubble team now. They look just like, different type of profile, but, seed range, they look very similar to Northwestern and Texas A&M. I think you're lower on Texas A&M than me, with good reason. I hate everything that's a 9 seed and below right now. Utah, I believe I dropped them to 32 overall. I wanted to drop them even further than that. Had that 46-point win over UCLA 2 weeks ago, and then lost to the Washington schools by a combined margin of like 57 points this week. Where do you have the Utes now?
I have them 30th overall, 8 seed also, but I had the same thought. I wanted them to be lower. I just couldn't find more teams to put
Yeah.
above them. But I don't think that's a solid 30th overall.
Yeah.
I think they're closer to the bubble than they are joining like the 5 seeds or anything like that.
All right, and then the last team that I just horribly cursed, Princeton. I had them as my bottom 7 seed heading into yesterday. Uh, Tweeted at our buddy Tim Kruger about it, and then he was texting me like, "What the hell? Why are you calling me out about Princeton, man?" And I was like, "Listen, if they have a great one-loss resume, they don't anymore. They lost to Cornell. Not only that, they were 3-1 against Quad Two yesterday. Now they're 1-2 against Quad Two because their Rutgers win and their Hofstra win got worse. I think the at-large case is over now. They're now a 12 seed for me, and I really don't see the case for them getting back in the mix."
I agree. I think this is it. I think they do not have a win that
Yeah.
speaks to being a tournament team. And now, what they could have done, I think, is lose in the Ivy League tournament,
Yeah.
but not take the loss to Cornell. Now that they've got the loss to Cornell, I just don't see there being any more wiggle room. I think if today the bracket was seeded, I think they'd be barely out as an at-large team if
Yeah.
they needed it. So how are they going to move back up
I
into
don't even
that
know if it would be
space?
close. I think they're pretty convincingly out now because really when we talked about it on Thursday, like the crux of my argument was like they're the only one-loss team. They're the only one-loss team. And we bring up the fact that they didn't play a Q1 team. I'm like, yeah, I have no rebuttal for that, but they only have one loss.
No.
Now that they've taken a second questionable loss, I mean, even if they were to win out, like win the rest of their games and the Ivy Championship, they might still be at 12. I don't know if they can get back up to a 10 or 11. All right, you wanted to talk about Auburn. Let's talk about Auburn now. Go ahead, dive in.
I am seeing Auburn falling fast. They have terrific efficiency, and actually their resume metrics have been better than you'd think they would be,
Yeah.
considering they haven't picked up a quality win. They have 0 wins against Quad 1.
In 3 chances,
In
too.
3
It's not like
chances.
Princeton where they just didn't get any chances. They've blown it repeatedly.
And Auburn is handing out home victories to really everybody they play, whether it's Mississippi State or Appalachian State,
Mm-hmm.
who they've handed out a home win to as well. Alabama earlier this week.
Yep.
Auburn hasn't done anything to show that they deserve a protected seed. And so for me, I have them at a 5 seed. And even that, you could argue, is generous. But I think there's a certain point where you say, well, they still have a nice overall record, and they have really nice efficiency metrics. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt at the 5 seed level. But I don't think you could even have them as a 4 seed anymore. There's just no argument for it, I don't think.
I dropped Auburn all the way to a 7 seed.
And that's fair.
And the 5 seed makes sense, and I'll tell you why. Houston from 2 years ago. They did not have a quad 1 win until Selection Sunday when they finally beat Memphis on a neutral court. They were 3rd in the net, 3rd in the predictives, like 8th in the resume metrics. So all higher than where Auburn is right now. And they got a 5 seed. I think they were like 15th in the AP poll for people who want to argue the AP poll matters, but they just didn't have the quality wins. At a certain point, you got to beat teams. Like just the case for Auburn is every single one of their wins is by 11 plus points. Every single one of their losses is by 6 points or less. But they need to get those quality wins. I don't think they're anywhere close to the bubble. Like it's an interesting divide where the 8s and the 9s feel like they are not comfortably in. I have Auburn at 26, and I'm like, okay, they would have to get just a horrible February to fall out. So I think like right at that 7-8 cut line is about where it feels like we're at with the bubble at this point. But yeah, I dropped them all the way to 26, and just like as I was going through the seed list, I'm like, nope, not ready for Auburn yet, not ready for Auburn yet, not ready for Auburn yet.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting point. I'd say for me personally, I think anybody that's through Clemson being that top 7 seed, I feel really good about making the tournament. I just don't really see a clear path for them missing. They would have to go through like a Xavier epic collapse from a few years ago where they just lost everything. Like they just couldn't win a game.
Trey Young Oklahoma team or something.
And even, they landed a 10 seed.
Well,
they were still
a 4
comfortably in the field.
reveal, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think these sorts of teams, for me, if you're 25 or above right now in my bracket, so that top 7 seed or above, I think you're pretty safe. It's not a lock, but I think you're in really, really good shape for a bid. It's once you get to that 7, 8, 9 range where I have some questions.
And that is the perfect segue to our next topic. Highest seeded team right now who you think could miss the tournament. For me, I have New Mexico at I think 23 overall. They're 2-3 against quads 1 and 2. It could fall apart in a hurry. I think even I have Dayton at 11. I don't think they will stumble enough to miss the field, but if they were to pick up some losses, that could get very questionable in a hurry. But I think it's generally going to be mid majors. You do not have a mid major as your team though. Who is yours?
I have South Carolina,
Yeah.
and I think they've done a very good job of overperforming. I think they have
What a compliment.
they have done a great job of winning games that have been very close oftentimes,
Yeah.
barely scraping by, and they're getting those wins. I don't have faith in them as a team though. And so I think where they're falling for me is they're a 7 seed right now. They're my last 7 seed, so barely hang on to a 7 seed. But I could easily see just a
Yeah.
few of those games going against them down the stretch that maybe they've been winning up to this point, and that'll be enough to push them down to that bubble. And once you're on that 11 line, 10 line, you're leaving yourself in the position that you and I might
Yeah.
think they're in, but the committee might not.
Yeah.
There's just, you get in that danger territory. You never know who in that committee room is going to speak up and say, yeah, but let's talk about this.
Yeah.
And sometimes it comes down to personalities.
Yep.
It can actually be that simple. Sometimes you have a very strong voice in that room that says, guys, I can't get past this. Here's why you shouldn't either. And
I
that can carry the day.
I too watched 12 Angry Men in high school, so I understand. Yeah, I have South Carolina, I think, at 25, and I agree they could fall apart in a hurry. Obviously, that win over Kentucky, one of the few wins they had that wasn't all that close, that will you know carry a lot of weight, even though it was a home game. But you beat Kentucky, you beat Duke, you beat Kansas. The committee certainly remembers those games. We've seen that over the years. One team currently not in your field, you're relatively confident will get in.
I have Cincinnati just outside the field. They're my second team out of the bracket, and I think they're a very good team from the games that I've watched. They've been so close in some quality road game
That's
chances.
every Big 12 game. They all come down to the wire.
Yeah, and I think they're kind of like the alter South Carolina in this regard. They've lost a couple of really close games. Texas, Baylor on the road, that could have changed everything. I would actually argue that they were more competitive against Kansas than Iowa State and West Virginia were. West Virginia and Iowa State just happened to hit shots. Cincinnati didn't hit shots, and
Yeah.
I actually thought Cincinnati played the Kansas better of all those three teams. So sometimes it just comes down to the luck factor. I don't think they've had luck on their side, and they very easily could be at like a 5 seed right now if just
Yeah.
a few shots went the opposite direction. So I think Cincinnati's eventually going to get into this field.
Yeah. I mean, we had Cincinnati out before their road win over BYU, and then you went a little crazy, vaulted them in at like 22 or something like that. And I couldn't very well argue with it. I mean, that was at the time the best win in the country and kind of backed up what they looked like up until that point. But I don't know. I have Cincinnati. I think I have Cincinnati just barely in. Maybe again, I didn't write down my notes. I forgot where I had Cincinnati. I wrote them down and left them at home because I'm an idiot. Um, but I think that they're gonna just take too many losses in Big 12 play. I think eventually that gauntlet is just gonna run them over, and then their non-conference schedule is gonna hurt them. The team that I have out, I would just say pick an ACC team. Right now I have three ACC teams in and six like just barely out, but I don't want to pick one of them, so I'll say Gonzaga. I have St. Mary's now as my projected auto bid from the West Coast Conference. And I think just to some extent the name power of Gonzaga, they're going to come up. They're what 25th in the net, something like that, 30th in the predictives. Their resume metrics are getting there. I wouldn't put them in now. They are not among my first five out right now. But if they show up against Kentucky, if they beat St. Mary's, if they sweep San Francisco, I think they're going to get the wins they need. They don't have it now.
I think they need to beat Kentucky. I think they need to beat Kentucky or they need to win the West Coast tournament. I think they have quickly become the second team in the pecking order in the WCC. I
Yeah,
think St. Mary's is actually far exceeding them. And St. Mary's to me is the team that now has a legitimate shot in that large berth. I just think Gonzaga, if they take that one additional Q1 loss when they play Kentucky, it just gets to the point where you look at it and you say, who did you beat?
yeah,
That's a tournament team. You just didn't do it, and you had chances. We talked about that earlier. The more chances you have, the worse the committee looks at it. And it's not necessarily because any one particular result is damaging. There's an
North Carolina last
accumulation.
year
Yeah,
went 1-9 against Q1, missed out because of it. Like you can't win 10% of your quad one games. I agree. That's why Gonzaga is not particularly close right now. I just think, despite struggling with Pacific last night, I think the bubble is so freaking weak right now that if they just do enough damage in the West Coast Conference, I think if they lose to Kentucky, if they lose at St. Mary's, and they lose in the West Coast Conference tournament, yeah, they probably don't get in. But I'm reasonably confident they're going to get it done. They're going to get enough of those wins.
I just think they're going to be dealing with competitors who beat tournament competition and maybe even less chances.
Yeah.
Like Gonzaga, it's not for lack of chances. What did Nevada do last year? They went 4-4 against Quad One. The rest of their resume wasn't really that good, to be honest with you. But they took advantage of the chances they had. Who else took advantage of chances they had? Pittsburgh. Not great resume metrics last year, but they took advantage when they played tournament quality competition. I think that's what it's going to come down to for Gonzaga. If they don't beat Kentucky, I think it's an all or nothing scenario. I really do. I think if they beat Kentucky, they're going to get in because that win is going to be monumental to changing their profile. They lose that, I think they're out because they just didn't take advantage.
You might be right. I'm just a little more confident in Gonzaga getting some wins down the stretch, even though, again, they almost lost to Pacific last night. I have no justification for it. Let's go to the current horrible state of the bubble. I'm going to pull up my tweet. You go ahead and tell me your last four in, first four out, and I got to remember who the heck mine are.
So the last four teams that I have in the field, starting from best to worst, Florida, Providence, Washington State.
Yes, I have them in too.
Cougars making their first appearance in my bracket this year, and Virginia Tech is my final team in the field right now.
Okay. I am most comfortable to least comfortable. Washington State, Nebraska, Providence, and Texas I have just barely in. Washington State got those great wins over Colorado and Utah. They were at home, but that backed up wins they already had. They beat Arizona, who we agree is top 8 in the country. And then the other three, Providence, Nebraska, and Texas, each have 3 quadrant 1 wins. So they just get over the hump for me. First four out.
I have Texas A&M at the very top of that group. They have just crossed a threshold that we haven't seen happen before. Not saying it couldn't happen, but we haven't seen a team that's in the 40s in the net or worse and has a 60 or worse strength of record combination make the field yet. And I think Texas A&M, if you look at their metrics, resume metrics, they're in the 60s in both KPI and strength of record. There is agreement that this team is well outside of what you would expect a tournament team to have as far as a resume metric. Still terrific wins, and that's why they're my first team out. Like I do feel like they get a huge bump up from where those resume metrics are, but I think they've just kind of crossed that threshold of not winning enough games.
They definitely challenged the heck out of themselves in non-conference play. I mean, I think they played 8 of their 11, 13. What's the SEC? SEC still had 18 games, so 8 of their 13 were against power conference opponents, and they went 4-4 in those games. So that bumped them down.
Don't lose at home to Ole Miss. That's the story there. They would be
so.
very far into my field if they didn't lose at home to Ole Miss. After that, I have Cincinnati, who we already talked about. Kansas State, I think, still has a good resume, but a lot of scary numbers associated with that profile as well. Moving on, Nevada, still a very nice overall record, some quality wins as well. But I just don't think they have quite enough. They're going to have a big opportunity when they play New Mexico. That could be the game that moves them into the field. And then finally, I'll throw you one bonus team. I said I'd talk about Richmond. I think the Spiders, moving on into that conversation based on that victory over Dayton, pretty nice numbers across the board. Now they have that profile changing victory at home over the Flyers to make their presence known.
Yeah, I too have Kansas State and Nevada in my first four out. I mean, we debated Nevada and Providence 3 days ago, and you kind of swayed me that I'm a little bit high on Nevada. So I dropped them down a bit. Well, again, if they beat New Mexico tonight, that's a totally different story. Colorado is my first team out, and I don't know why. I look at their resume and like the metrics are solid across the board. They don't have terrible losses, but something about it just can't put them in. I don't know why. They're 1-3 in quad one. I think that might just be what's holding me up. And then Virginia Tech, I have as my second team out, and then Kansas State and Nevada, third and fourth.
What you're describing with Colorado is a thing that we see all the time. Happened with Rutgers last year. Happens pretty much every year. There's one team who just something bugs you
Yeah.
about their profile, and they end up missing the tournament. I think Colorado's a great example because I was going with them today. They're on my 11 line, and I was like, I don't want Colorado this far into the field. If they're going to be in, I want them in my first four or just outside of the field. But I agree, all their metrics were nice and their quad splits were nice. Like everything was good, but something just bugged me about them. And I feel like maybe they could be that 2021 Louisville team who like nobody really sees them missing the field, or 2019 TCU
Yeah.
where they just
Yeah, Rutgers last year.
in Rutgers last year, that team who people think are kind of fairly solidly in, but just something bugs you about them, and that's who the committee chooses to leave out.
Yeah. I mean, I know that conference affiliation doesn't matter. I think part of it is I just don't want to have four Pac-12 teams in the field. And also that win over Miami that looked so great at the time, they won by what, like 25 or something. Miami's not even in the mix anymore. So I think that still looks good from a predictives and net perspective, but it's not the quality win that it was a while ago, and they've taken some questionable losses since then. So I think that just knocks them out for me.
Yeah, I think we're getting to the point of the season where teams are starting to get fairly locked in place. So if you're, having these doubts about a profile for any reason, it's time for teams to shore up those
Yeah.
doubts on whatever their weakness is, because you got about a month, little over a month to fix it. If you don't, the committee is going to take you that thing and they're going to run with it. It can be a positive, it can be a negative. If your thing is we exceeded expectations when we played Q1 games, they're going to bump you up that seed line compared to where you should be.
Yeah.
But if you didn't take advantage of some of these opportunities and you still don't have that marquee win on your record, that could be the thing that leaves you missing the field.
All right. One last team. We are over what we usually aim for, going for half an hour, but a team that's in my first few out, not even in my first four out anymore, Villanova, 11-9 overall. Where are you at with the Wildcats? Because if you're not at least 3 games over 500, you don't get an at-large bid. That's not an official rule, but it doesn't happen.
They are just below Richmond on my list.
Yeah.
I think they're pretty well out of the bracket at this point. They're like Texas A&M, but Texas A&M's done just a little bit
Yep.
more at this point. Villanova's honestly, sometimes it comes down to being this simple. They're losing too many games. You need to win games. Doesn't even matter who you play. Sometimes you just have to win games.
And there's a lot of tough games in the Big East. But yeah, they had they were great in the Bahamas. Beat, what was it? Memphis, North Carolina, and Texas Tech, Texas A&M. I forget who it was. They had 3 really good wins. Then they had 3 terrible losses in Philadelphia, and they've just kind of like hovered at 500 since then. And just
Villanova
they
beat
got 'em in.
UNC on a neutral court,
Yeah.
and I have them out of the bracket. That's
Yep.
just like almost hard to fathom, but
Yeah.
11-9 is not pretty.
Yeah.
So make it pretty, win some more games, Villanova. You'll be right back in the mix, but you got to win.
Exactly. All right. Go Chiefs. We'll see you guys on Thursday. Take care.